So first of all, who is Wesley Huff? Wesley Huff is a scholar from Canada. Just quickly off of Google, Wesley Huff holds a BA in sociology from York University, Master's Theological Studies from Tyndale University, and a PhD in New Testament at the University of Toronto's Wycliffe College. So he's a Canadian theological scholar, and he's also the Central Canada Director for Apologetics Canada, a group that their mission is to equip the Christian community with biblically sound, intellectually robust, and culturally engaged faith. So just basically to help educate Christians more about manuscripts and things like that, and apologetics. So that's a good thing. Now, I'm not here to chop down Wesley Huff in any way whatsoever. But there's a lot. I heard him talking about the book of Enoch, and he didn't say anything wrong about the book of Enoch, or everything he said was correct. But in historical, especially in biblical historical topics, sometimes there is no exactly right or wrong. Sometimes things can be quite muddy and murky, and you could be right and wrong at the same time. So I wanted to just expand a little bit on what he was talking about, and sort of, I guess he's just repeating what he was trained in the university, which is all correct. But there's some things that are sort of being ignored that are very important regarding the book of Enoch. And so I just wanted to dive into that a bit and add to the argument, add to the body of information that he presented. So let's take a quick look at Wesley and who he is and what he says.
Doesn't necessarily mean it's heretical, but it just means it's in a separate category. Within the category of apocryphal, you also have documents that are sometimes referred to as pseudepigraphical, right? So think of pseudo, like a pseudonym, right? It's not your real name. Pseudo and graphe. It's a strange writing. It's not your, like pseudo means false, and then graphe means writing. So pseudepigraphical documents are documents like the Book of Enoch, which have a label of being written by a particular individual who it's largely agreed upon is not the individual. And so that's in a category of its own. The thing with Enoch is that it was never considered banned. It was always part of a group of Jewish literature, which was very important within sort of the Jewish understanding. So we've largely been talking almost exclusively, I think, about documents that post-date the New Testament documents.
Bravo. Yeah.
Right? So the Gospels that were written by the various Gnostic groups, those are after Jesus. Enoch comes before Jesus, and it's in a category of literature that was written between the last book of the Old Testament and the first book of the New Testament. So there's about 400 years there between, I mentioned in the Protestant Old Testament, you have the last book is Malachi. Between Malachi and Matthew, there's a 400-year gap, which is sometimes referred to as the 400 years of silence, which is a bit of a misnomer because it wasn't silent. There was a whole bunch of Jewish literature being written, but there was this cultural understanding within ancient Judaism that the voice of God was not being communicated through prophets in the same way. So that's why it's sometimes referred to as that. However, the Jews are writing all sorts of things. And one of those things that they are writing on was the book of Enoch. Now, we also need to be careful with the book of Enoch because what we call specifically first Enoch, there's a first and second Enoch. When the book of Enoch is usually referred to, it's usually referred to, we're usually pointing to the book of first Enoch. The book of first Enoch as it exists, you can go buy a copy of First Enoch. In fact, there's a pretty recent, very good translation of it by the publisher Hermania, which is the most updated one, takes into consideration things like the Dead Sea Scrolls. And what you have there is a collection of various Jewish texts that span about a period of 200 years before Jesus and about 50 to 100 years after Jesus in multiple languages. So you have sections of the Book of Enoch in Aramaic, you have sections in Coptic, and you have sections in Greek. And those are all brought together in what we call First Enoch. Now, the old sections are really, really old. The old sections are about 200 BC. They're in the 3rd century BC, and they're largely written in Aramaic and Greek. And those predate Jesus by a ways, and actually the New Testament shows recognition of it. In the book of Jude, it refers to a section of the book of Enoch. So it's present in the Bible. Now, that doesn't mean they thought it was scripture, because we know unanimously they did not think it was scripture. Jude is simply referring to a piece of literature that they would have been familiar with to make a particular argument.
Okay, I'm going to have to stop right there and interject, because Jude, I have to disagree with that completely. Because all you have to do is take a look at Jude. And Jude is not talking as if somebody who doesn't believe the book of Enoch. Jude is talking from the standpoint of someone who believes that Enoch is the word of God. Okay, the book of Jude, verse 14, he says, "And Enoch also, the 7th from Adam, prophesied of these, saying, Behold, the Lord comes with 10,000s of his saints to execute judgment upon all, and to convince all that are ungodly among them of all their ungodly deeds which they have ungodly committed, and all their hard speeches which ungodly sinners have spoken against him." Okay, so he's quoting the beginning of the first Enoch. And he's saying Enoch, the 7th from Adam, prophesied. So he's saying Enoch wrote that book and Enoch prophesied. And to say it's prophesied is not to take it lightly. Peter in 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 4, he's alluding to the book of the Watchers, first Enoch. And he says, "For if God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell, and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved unto judgment." That is straight out of Enoch and other apocryphal Jewish texts from before Christ, in that 400-year period that Wesley Hunt is talking about.
Paul also quotes Menander, the Greek philosopher. He didn't think Menander was divinely inspired. He's just using the literature of the day to make particular arguments. But when we're talking about the book of Enoch, Jewish scripture occasionally refers to supernatural beings, like angels, like seraphim, like cherubim, like demons. But so you have these things mentioned in the Old Testament, but they're never really explained. And so within this 400-year period between the Old and the New Testament, the Jews are like, okay, what do we think of this? How are we to understand these supernatural beings that are created by God, that exist in some sort of parallel world, in the unseen realm, and they're interacting with one another, and they have different forms and functions. So one of the issues is that we often refer to a bunch of these things as angels. Angel is not what the thing is, it's what the thing does. So malach in the Hebrew, or angelos in the Greek, means messenger. So it is not a description of its ontology, what it is, it's a description of what it does.
Got it.
These are supernatural beings who go and they communicate messages to people. They're in some sort of relation in terms of their supernaturalness to other creatures like the seraphim and like the cherubim, who are supernatural divine throne guardians, which was a concept that was not foreign to the ancient world. Misnomer in terms, but I get it because we kind of broad brush with all these categories. The Book of Enoch is part of the literature that's trying to explain that. What on earth is this?
So he's presenting the book of Enoch as if it's like some, in this dark period or silent period, there are Jews who are just wrestling with thinking about what the Bible means and what are devils and what are angels, and they're just making stuff up. When if we look at the actual Torah, let me just look this up quickly. And if you shall say in your heart, how shall we know the word which the Lord has not spoken? So how do you know when a prophet is a prophet? Well, he says, well, if the thing comes true, then he's a prophet. Okay? So the next question to ask is, Enoch, he said himself that some parts of the book of Enoch were written 400 BC. The book of the Watchers was found among the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's dated at least 100 BC, probably older. And the other thing that people tend to not understand is that a lot of books, these extra books, were not written down for centuries. They were just told. They didn't have television. They didn't have they didn't have written books flying around like we do, because back then a book was a very special thing. A scroll. It was it was years of worth of work just to have one, and not everybody could read one. So it was something only very few really had their hands on. And so they told stories, and they remembered stories. They had incredible memories in those days. Like the native people in America, it's recorded by historians that they had incredible memory of these stories that they told, and it would be like a 3-hour story, and it was handed down through the generations. Now, that doesn't mean that maybe some pieces of it were altered or some pieces of it were lost, but the main important ingredients existed within the story. And the same thing was true in Judaism, that there were a lot of these pseudographical books or apocryphal books that were only word of mouth, and then they were written down. Some of them even after Christ, like 400 years after Christ, there were some books written down that are Jewish books, and but they are perceived as having existed since before Christ in the spoken word. So with Enoch, it very well could have been from ancient times being told over and over and never written down. So if a linguist comes along and they'll look at like the grammar style of when it was written, you can tell by, through the Bible, you can date the grammar and certain periods. And so they can put a more or less a general date on the book. So I haven't studied the book of Enoch in Aramaic or in Greek, but from the way they're talking, it's likely that it's a later grammar that is written in. So they can say, well, this isn't more than 200 BC. So, but just because it was written in 200 BC, that doesn't mean the story wasn't told for thousands of years before that. And so that's one of the points I want to make. Now, if there's parts of the book of Enoch that turn out to be true, and that there was prophetic words, then this is one of the things about Enoch that merits maybe a little more special attention to this book. And there's other reasons that I'll get to soon. So what kind of things are written in Enoch that I would say are prophetic? So if you're thinking, okay, let's just for a ballpark figure, let's say 200 years before Christ, this was written down. Okay? What are some of the prophetic words from Enoch? I have a book here that I'm reading from. I'll show you the cover of it. Oops, that's not the cover. Where's the cover? There it is. The complete 70-book Apocrypha, including writings of the Apostolic Fathers. So it's just a collection of all the apocryphal books, 70 of them. And this book is assembled by Joseph Lumpkin. So let's take a look in the Book of Watchers. Let's read a couple of things, and you tell me if they're prophetic. Okay? So first, Enoch, in verse 9, chapter 1, verse 9. And behold, he comes with 10,000 of his holy ones to execute judgment on all, and to destroy all the ungodly, and to convict all flesh of all the works of their ungodliness which they have ungodly committed, and of all the hard things which ungodly sinners have spoken against him. So that's a direct quote of Jude saying when Enoch prophesied. So that's one thing, okay? Now this is a prophecy of, sounds like the second coming and judgment day. So how is Jude saying Enoch prophesied when he said this about the coming judgment day? So Jude is saying, well, Enoch is talking about Christian things, because, see, Jesus was prophesied by many prophets in the Jewish Bible, in the canon scriptures of the Old Testament, especially Isaiah, Jeremiah, Joel. They all prophesied of him, and we see these prophecies, Hosea, Zechariah. It's just full of prophecies about Jesus Christ. But these prophecies were not understood until Jesus showed up. And in the book of Isaiah, he said, the prophecy was, my servant will come, and you will wait, the islands will wait for his law. Out of his mouth the law will come, and he will magnify my law and make it holy. And this was the Messiah who was to come and explain all things. Okay? So if Jude is a close friend of Jesus, and Jude is calling Enoch a prophet, don't you think that Jesus would have told Jude, oh, no, Enoch's not a prophet. He was just a guy thinking about stuff back in the day, and, he got some stuff right, some stuff wrong, or whatever. No. Jude was taught that Enoch is a prophet. So there's one point to be made, okay? And so he's saying Enoch prophesied of the second coming of Christ. But did Enoch prophesy about anything else? Actually, yeah, a lot, like incredible stuff. Let's take a look here. First Enoch chapter 46, verse 1 to 4. First Enoch chapter 46, verse 1 to 4. And there I saw one whose face looked ancient. His head was white like wool, and with him was another being, whose countenance had the appearance of a man, and his face was full of graciousness, like one of the holy angels. And I asked the angel who went with me and showed me all the hidden things concerning that Son of Man, and who he was, and where he came from, and why he went with the Ancient One. And he answered and said to me, This is the Son of Man who has righteousness, with whom dwells righteousness, and who reveals all the treasures of that which is hidden, because the Lord of spirits has chosen him, and whose lot has preeminence before the Lord of spirits in righteousness, and is forever. Okay? And this Son of Man whom you have seen shall rise up the kings and the mighty from their seats, and the strong from their thrones, and shall loosen the reins of the strong, and break the teeth of the sinners. So, this is 200 BC, okay? Now, there were groups of people who believed that Enoch was a prophet. Now, were they disappointed? Did Enoch turn out to be wrong? He's talking like this. Okay, what's another one? There's many of them. There's another. Let's look at another one. Chapter 48, verse 2 to 7. And there's tons of it, but I'm picking out some of the more highlighted ones, right? Okay, and at that hour the Son of Man was named in the presence of the Lord of spirits, and his name was brought before the head of days, even before the sun, and the signs were created. Before the stars of heaven were made, his name was named before the Lord of spirits. He shall be a staff to the righteous, and they shall steady themselves and not fall, and he shall be the light of the Gentiles. That's a direct quote from Isaiah. Okay? And the hope of those who are troubled of heart. So, there's that. Now, let's take a look at another one. First Enoch 69, verse 26 to 29. And there was great joy among them, and they blessed and glorified and exalted, because the name of that Son of Man had been revealed to them. So this is talking about the first advent of Christ, okay? And he sat on the throne of his glory, and the sum of judgment was given to the Son of Man. And he caused the sinners and all those who led the world astray to pass away and be destroyed from off the face of the earth. And they shall be bound with chains and shut up. He's talking about demons now, or fallen angels, right? Think about the abyss in the book of Revelation, where Satan is bound with a chain and thrown in the abyss. The Revelation fits right in with apocalyptic literature. All Jewish apocalyptic literature. It's a recurring theme of these images of, like the abyss and things like that, and the Son of Man and the glory, and it's a recurring theme within this apocalyptic literature. Okay. And they shall be bound with chains and shut up and imprisoned in their place of assembly, and all their works vanish from the face of the earth. And from that time forward there shall be nothing corruptible. For that Son of Man has appeared, and has seated himself on the throne of his glory, and all the evil shall pass away before his face. So, seated upon the throne of his glory, are the apostles quoting Enoch? Because I don't remember reading that anywhere in the Jewish canon of the Old Testament. But there it is in Enoch, 200 years before Christ. Okay? And all evil shall pass before his face, and the word of that Son of Man shall go out and be strong before the Lord of spirits. And it came to pass that after this, that during his lifetime his name was raised up to the Son of Man and to the Lord of spirits from among those who dwell on the earth. And he was raised aloft on chariots of the Spirit, and his name vanished among them. And from that day I was no longer numbered. Okay, it gets kind of cryptic again. But Enoch, he goes into great detail on some of these very Christian motifs. And this predates Christ by at least 200 years. I'd say far longer than that. And the other thing to talk about here is that, there wasn't this old idea that there was just these little Jews in Jerusalem, this little council in Jerusalem, and that Jesus came and had, a disagreement with the council, and they killed him, and then that ended their council, and Christianity flourished from there, is a very simple idea. But the truth is much more complicated. There were several groups. At the time of Christ, there were several Jewish groups. Josephus names three. He names the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the Essenes. Okay? But there were actually a bunch of them. The Sanhedrin Council, that was the authority in Jerusalem, set up by, or not set up by, but recognized by King Herod, and therefore also by Rome. And the Sanhedrin Council was made up of two groups, the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Okay? But there were also Samaritan Jews. The Samaritans had a different version of Judaism, and there were some Jews who sided with them, and the Samaritans called themselves Jews. So that's another sect coming out of Judaism. Okay? And there was the Zealots. The Zealots, one of the apostles was a zealot. I can't remember exactly who, but definitely one of the apostles was called the Zealot. Now the Zealots were a group that they thought that God is only waiting for us to overthrow Rome, and they wanted to rebel against Rome. And they thought that with God in their power, they could be like Joshua, and if only enough people gathered together, they could overthrow Rome and reestablish the Holy Land. So that's the Zealots. That group was quite active. And there was the Herodians. The Herodians were pro-Herod. Like Herod was the king of the Jews. He was actually an Edomian, or an Edomite. But the Romans had made him the king of the Jews and his family, and he married into the Jewish royal family. So that was the Herodian dynasty. So there was a whole sector of society that was very pro-Herod. So that's the Herodian Jews, okay? And there was the Qumran community, which is where the Dead Sea Scrolls are come from. Now they found like ritual baths there, and it looked like they had a place where they actually wrote scrolls, and they had libraries, and they were in their writings. They can find out a lot about them, and they felt like the satanic forces had taken over the temple, and they were the outsiders now, and they were waiting for the Messiah to come to take the temple back for them, and to reestablish God's kingdom. And they were very, very much into ritual bathing. And John the Baptist, this is why they say, okay, John the Baptist might have been attached to them, because they were in close proximity to where John the Baptist is thought to have been baptizing in the Jordan. But I can see a difference with John the Baptist. It's something like, when God led the children of Israel out of Egypt, he was very adamant to them about using natural stones, 12 natural stones, to make an altar, and not having any chisel or anything ever laid upon these stones to alter them from their natural state. Because it was like the opposite of making an idol, that is not made by man's hands. It's natural, a part of the natural world. So I think John the Baptist, he was baptizing in the River Jordan, not in a man-made bathing system. So that's the difference I see between John the Baptist and the Qumran. He might have known the Qumran community, probably knew them or knew some of them, but I don't think he was one of them or working with them. I think he was just living in the natural world, living in the desert, and baptizing in the river. And that was his part in life. He was alone. And then of all these groups, there was also the Jesus group, which was Jesus and the apostles and all the people who believed in Jesus as he grew his followers. So that was another sect of Judaism. These Jews believing that Jesus was the actual Messiah that was prophesied to come, prophesied by Isaiah and Jeremiah and Hosea and Zechariah and Enoch. Because if you read Enoch, that's the guy. And if you do a search, say, on the King James Version, of how many times did Jesus call himself the Son of Man in the 4 Gospels? In the King James Version, you'll find that he called himself the Son of Man 77 times in the 4 Gospels. Now, you can think what you want about that. And even if you are more a Bible in the textual criticism and think, well, it's not 77 times, it's still an awful lot of times. So he very much referred to himself as the Son of Man. Now, this Son of Man is a figure that appears in the Old Testament and in the book of Enoch, as we just read, quite a bit. Now, in the Old Testament, in the book of Ezekiel, you'll find that the God keeps calling Ezekiel, "O Son of Man." So this could be an alluding to Ezekiel playing a role of a Messiah. Oh, Son of Man, do this. Oh, Son of Man, do that. That could be a part of the key to understanding Ezekiel. You see, God's using Ezekiel as a metaphor of the Son of Man. There's also in Daniel chapter 10. Now in Daniel chapter 10, verse 5, he sees this one man clothed in linen. And he has his fiery eyes and his bronze limbs and shining brightly. It's something like the vision that John saw in the Revelation. Very similar. But then, as the story progresses in Daniel chapter 10, that one man clothed in linen becomes one in the likeness of the sons of men. So he's getting more and more personal with Daniel. As Daniel fell flat on his face and he came and touched him and comforted him. And as he does this, he becomes more of a personable figure too. Because now he's like one in the likeness of the sons of men. And then in Daniel 10:10, just before he starts to tell him, and now I will tell you the things that will come, that are written in the book. And he goes on to go right through Daniel chapter 11 and 12, telling him all this prophecy. He is called in verse 10, like the appearance of a man. So this whole Son of Man thing is this the angel of the Lord, or this highly ranked being is the Son of Man. It becomes very apparent in some of the deeper prophetic scriptures, and also in the apocryphal Jewish works. The book of Baruch is also very, very curiously using the same kind of language. It's very Christian and very in tune with the gospel message. So these things have to be looked at as more than just some Jews hanging around thinking about angels. And the book of Enoch goes into great detail about how the angels fell and how they made children with women, and how their sons, how their children, since they were eternal beings, that when the flesh dies, their spirits become terrestrial spirits. And this is what we call demons, and they are eternally thirsty, and they are corrupt souls, and so they have all these evil intentions. And where else would all that come from? Like, that's the only book we have that really explains how all this happened. And Jesus, through his whole ministry, all four Gospels, he's casting out devils left, right, and center. He's casting out devils. And he's talking about demons. And he's talking about terrestrial spirits and explaining spirits, right? So, do you think anyone ever asked him, well, what about the book of Enoch? Jude must have asked him. And he was never corrected by Jesus. So you have to think of that also, is that Jesus is the one who came to explain everything. Now, the book of Enoch, I think the reason that it gets thrown by the wayside mostly is because of all the demonology. It turns people off, it scares them, or whatever. Or maybe the demons cause people to turn away from it. I don't know. But it has a lot. If you're interested in demonology, you definitely want to look at the Book of Enoch. And the Book of Baruch is also very apocryphal. I'll put it in that term. Now they call Enoch a pseudographical book because they say, well, it says it's written by Enoch, but somebody else wrote it. Now, like I said, it could have been word of mouth handed down for centuries. Who knows? But the fact is the prophecies in it, at least some of them are true. They're more Christian than Isaiah. So it cannot be ignored. And it cannot be just tossed aside as some kind of, Jews guessing. It's got inspiration in it. Now, maybe there's parts of it put together with other books, or maybe there's some parts have been skewed. I don't know. But there are very prophetic parts in it, and it cannot be ignored. And the only full copy front to back of Enoch that is in existence is in Ethiopia. And the other thing about Ethiopia is that Mr. Wesley Huff says that the Ethiopians didn't have the Book of Enoch or any books of the Bible until the 4th century. Well, that's also not really correct, because there's a story in the book of Acts of Philip being directly sent by the Holy Spirit, actually transferred in a supernatural way to meet this Ethiopian that was attached to the Ethiopian royalty, that was on his way back to Ethiopia to give him the gospel to bring to Ethiopia. So, and the Ethiopians they claim to have a long history that dates back to the Queen of Sheba meeting Solomon. So, appearing in the book of Acts, this supernatural bringing the gospel to the Ethiopian is just, it's directly like, why would that be in the book of Acts if Ethiopia didn't, if Ethiopia didn't have any merit to what they claim? Like, there's something there. It cannot be fully explained or fully proved or fully explored, but there's something there, because they have this history and they have these books that are preserved, and they had the only copies until the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, and up comes the Book of Enoch written in Aramaic. So this shows that the Ethiopians had something after all, that now is dated to Judea in the 2nd century BC. So did they get that from Philip? Or did they have that since Solomon? Or did they get it in the 4th century from Christians? Like, there's more than one answer and more than one question to answer. This is what this video is about. when you start getting into all the evidence going on around this stuff, there's lots of different questions and answers. So it's not that cut and dried as Wesley Huff seems to think. And my guess is, like, I have nothing against him, or I wouldn't say that he's wrong, and he is a very good scholar. But at the same time, this is what he's learned from the universities. And now he's a young guy, he's on a journey, and he's going to be looking more and more at all these things. And as you look more and more, the story becomes bigger and bigger. There's a lot more to it. And the only other thing I wanted to point out is that the word watchers, the watchers, you'll see that in the book of Enoch and in other books. That comes from the Aramaic language. Watchers, you'll find it in Daniel chapter 4, verse 17, the decree of the watchers. And it's an Aramaic word. It's Irene. Now, in Aramaic, they don't have the Hebrew word for angel. The Hebrew word for angel is malach, and it literally means messenger. Like, if the King David sent a messenger to somebody, he sent a malach. It's just a messenger. But God is sending messengers, and these are called malach. They're called messengers, but they're messengers from God. So this is the angels, what we call angels. But actually in the Bible, they're just called messengers. But in the Aramaic language, they don't use the word malach. They use the word Irene, which means watchers or guardians. And now you can speculate on, are they like angels, or are they like the Sephirim, or these other angelic beings that are in the Bible? We don't know. They're just watchers. It's Aramaic. It's a little bit different than Hebrew, and they use a different word, a completely different word. So that's what a watcher is. It's an Aramaic divine being. Okay, we'll read a couple of more Enoch here. First Enoch 62:2. And the Lord of spirits seated him on the throne of his glory, and the spirit of righteousness was poured out on him, and the word of his mouth slays all the sinners, and all the unrighteous are destroyed from in front of his face. And in that day all the kings and the mighty and the exalted and those who hold the earth shall stand up and shall see and recognize that he sits on the throne of his glory, and that righteousness is judged before him, and no lying word is spoken before him. Then pain will come on them as on a woman in labor. She has pain in giving birth when her child enters the mouth of the womb, and she has pain in childbirth. And one portion of them shall look at the other, and they shall be terrified, and they shall look downcast, and pain shall seize them, when they see that the Son of Man sitting on the throne of his glory. This is Enoch. It's crazy. It's like 200 years before Christ, minimum. Okay? Now, Book of Enoch, chapter 90. It's a big book too. It's quite a read, I'll tell you. 80, verse 20. Chapter 90, verse 20. And I saw until a great sword was given to the sheep, and the sheep proceeded against all the beasts of the field to slay them, and all the beasts and the birds of heaven fled before their face. And I saw that man who wrote the book according to the command of the Lord, until he opened that book concerning the destruction which those 12 last shepherds had wrought, and showed that they had destroyed much more than their predecessors before the Lord of the sheep. And I saw until the Lord of the sheep came to them, and took in his hand the staff of his wrath, and smote the earth, and the earth clave asunder, and all the beasts and all the birds of heaven fell among those sheep, and were swallowed up in the earth, and it covered them. And I saw until a throne was erected in the pleasant land, and the Lord of the sheep sat himself on it, and the other took the sealed books and opened those books before the Lord of the sheep. And the Lord called those men the 7 first white ones, and commanded that they should bring before him, beginning with the first star which led the way. Okay, we'll forget all that. It's too deep. But in conclusion, if we think about who were the people of Qumran who had the Dead Sea Scrolls, there's a few theories. There was a community there, and there were all of these books buried there in caves, hidden. Now, one theory would be that when the war with the Romans was breaking out, that they brought all the scrolls from all over Judea and brought them to hide them in these caves in Qumran. That's a possibility. But if the Qumran people are sitting there going, well, the people who run the temple are evil, are they going to go to the Qumran people to hide the scrolls for them? I don't know about that. But they had like solar calendars and a lot of mysticism and all kinds of stuff. And naturally they were drawn to the Book of Enoch also because it's an apocryphal book. But there was also a lot of Enochian Jews. In other words, a lot of Jews believed the Book of Enoch was prophetic. And they believed it spoke of this coming Messiah and gave more detail and talked more about demons. And Jesus, if you study the Gospels and the life of Jesus, he was an Enoch believer because he's cast out demons. He talked about demons all the time as if it was an everyday part of life. And he overthrew the demons. And the apostles also talked about demons. And this is totally out of the Book of Enoch. So, and the Son of Man and all this other stuff. So, you know, the fact that Jesus never addressed the Book of Enoch, or the parts that he did address it were never were lost. It's very apparent in the writings of the Gospels and in the writings of the apostles that Enoch was a thing. And also Justin Martyr was he upheld the Book of Enoch as a scripture. And this doesn't mean that all Christians in the 2nd century did that. But this shows that there was a group. Justin Martyr spoke of knowing many Christians and there was obviously a group of Christians that fully believed the book of Enoch. And how couldn't they, after reading these things about the Son of Man in that book? So there's much more to it than just having historical evidence. There's also prophetic evidence that you have to consider. It reminds me of what Mark Twain said. He said, I was educated once. It took me years to get over it. It's sort of like education is a wonderful thing, but you're learning the things that that institution has decided to live with. And institutions have to have a certain stability and a certain amount of supporters. And so institutions are going to settle on theories that are safer. They're not going to go out on a limb so much. And that's just there's nothing wrong with that. It's just a fact of life. So having a master's degree is a good thing, a great thing. But it's also not everything. There's more. And I don't begrudge Wesley of anything. He's doing great. I think he's doing awesome. But I just wanted to sort of give a little bit more wider view of these pseudographical books, and that they can't just be thrown off as, oh, it's just a book that somebody wrote. There's much more to it than that. So thank you very much for listening to the video, and I'll see you next time. Don't forget to like and subscribe, do all that stuff. And thank you for watching.